Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Wilson Stribling. Welcome to another edition of At Issue, where we discuss and debate the issues facing the state of Mississippi and how these issues impact you. It is the fourth week of the 2019 legislative session. The deadline for committees to report and pass bills in their own house is nearing. MPB's political analysts Austin Barbour and Brandon Jones will join us in a moment to share their insight. But first, let's take a look at what's happening in both the House and Senate committees. Mississippi legislators are making their opening bids on an increase in teacher pay. One of the bills up for consideration is House Bill 1349, which proposes $500 increases in teacher salaries for each of the next 2 years for a total of $1,000. The bill also includes proposals intended to alleviate a shortage of Mississippi teachers. One part of the plan would allow retired teachers to return to work at a somewhat lower salary while still drawing state pensions. The House Education Committee on Thursday passed the bill sponsored by Republican Representative Charles Busby of Pascagoula. The House also advanced a bill meant to make Mississippi schools safer from mass shootings and other threats. The House Education Committee on Thursday passed House Bill 1283, sending it to the full House for further consideration. The plan would require safety inspections and twice-yearly active shooter drills at public schools. It would also create a threat reporting mechanism to be monitored by 3 dedicated analysts at the State Department of Public Safety. A task force convened by Governor Phil Bryant recommended that every school have a school resource officer. Republican Representative Mark Baker of Brandon is sponsoring the bill. Some legislators are working to find new ways to help Mississippians who are addicted to opioids. The Opioid Crisis Intervention Act, House Bill 881, could help users avoid the normal criminal court process in favor of drug courts. Drug courts offer treatment programs and often less jail time. Members of the House Medicaid Committee explained some of the bill's key points.
You know, the crisis is worse in certain parts of the state than others, and so we're trying to get in front of it, address it where it's bad already, and then try to help stop it or slow it down where it's gaining steam, and this bill will help do that.
From the committee meeting, what was some of the pushback and why was it?
Some of the pushback, and one was a very good amendment that was offered in the occupied dwelling, and so we had a substitute amendment that would leave it up to the homeowner or the business owner, if they know the person, which in many times that's the case, it'll leave it up to that homeowner to say, or the business owner, property owner, to say, I know this individual, they need help, and so they have to sign off on drug court for that person to get drug court.
And that'll, in the end, help that person get treatment versus putting them in the system.
Yes, instead of putting them in jail where they can't get the help they need, at least they have an option of drug court to try to get rehabilitated.
It seems like we're learning the lesson of the past. When we took on drugs is just a criminal nature instead of doing more prevention and more active measures to make sure people don't go to jail. So that it's at least a good thing that we're learning the lesson now. And it's not just opioids, it's addiction period in this state that folks are seeking out different drugs to cope with life. And that's something that we have to deal with on a public health issue instead of a criminal issue. And this bill seems to be giving us more options to divert people to drug court, more pre-diversion programs when someone is arrested with the opioid or any type of narcotic. So that's a good thing for us to start doing that.
One of the things that it allows is for them to be on a doctor-prescribed medication that's helping them get off of that, but also be in drug court. Because right now, if you're in the drug court program, if you test positive for any drugs, you're out. Even ones that are helping them get off that are doctor-prescribed. So that's kind of the language that is kind of it's not set just right just yet, but it's language that we're working on to make sure that you don't want people still on the drugs, but you want them to be able to go through the drug court program and still working with a doctor to get off of the opioids. And the Good Samaritan law that we passed last year or the year before, I forget the dates, allows someone, if someone has a crisis, an overdose, and you call them, then you're not arrested for being in the presence of the drugs. This kind of cleans up some of the language that the district attorney said we needed for them to make it a little clearer who has that immunity, and makes it a little bit better for them to call and for other people in the area not to be arrested. Because what had happened in the past is that if you were at a party, somebody overdosed, everybody just left and would leave them because they were afraid of getting caught up and being arrested. Even if you were not taking drugs, you were there when somebody else was. So this language kind of helps that to hopefully to allow some people to make the call and say they need help without worrying about going to jail.
John Dowdy is director of the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics. He says he's concerned that language in the Opioid Crisis Intervention Act that is meant to expand the Good Samaritan law could instead open the door for drug dealers and abusers to get away with the crime.
I'm not necessarily opposed to an individual who is consuming drugs with another being able to get that type of immunity, but again, we already have a law on the books that protects those kind of individuals. What I don't want to have happen is individuals who are out there selling heroin or fentanyl, and they're allowing somebody to shoot up in their home to then be able to call 911 and get some type of an immunity for that. And I'll give you an example. We worked a case last year here in Hinds County. The individual was a fairly well-known heroin and meth dealer here in the city of Jackson. When we executed the search warrant on his home, he had a surveillance system in the home. He had needles that he would actually use to inject the heroin into individuals. We learned as we were doing the investigation that the previous Saturday night that there was a young lady that had gone in there and had used heroin in his house. They called 911 and she ended up at University of Mississippi Medical Center. He also had Narcan on his dresser to help revive individuals, but what he was doing as a dealer was not allowing people to leave his home. He was making them shoot up in his home. And this is an individual who's making his living off of selling these kind of drugs to people. So you got to be real careful about how you word that type of language just to make sure that you're not allowing a door to get open that you don't intend to really open.
The Mississippi Immigrants' Rights Alliance is seeking state lawmakers' support for a number of bills it says will make driving in Mississippi more safe and college tuition more affordable for undocumented residents. Immigrants and advocates spoke during a press conference at the Capitol this week.
La licencia de conducir. Señores congresistas, venimos porque nos den su apoyo, porque esta ley pase. La necesitamos, toda nuestra comunidad la necesita. Hoy estamos unidos todos, hondureños, Guatemala, mexicanos, todos, por un solo propósito, con un solo propósito para que podamos por este año seguir luchando porque esta ley pase. De verdad es sumamente importante para todos nosotros, tanto como para evitar un ticket, como para una identificación que es la que más sirve en todo el estado. Venimos por su apoyo.
This year, we are all here, people from Honduras, from Guatemala. We're here for one extremely important issue, among others. That is the driver's license, to be able to protect our people. We are all here for this issue, to push it forward, because we need to pass this law this year to get a driver's license for people, for immigrants.
Latinos accounted for 3.5% of all self-employed Mississippi residents in 2015. And generated over $107 million in business income. According to the American Immigration Council's report on documented and undocumented immigrants, immigrant-led households in the state of Mississippi paid over $245.25 million in federal taxes and over $112 million in state and local taxes in 2014 alone. If they could receive legal status, their contribution would raise some $28 million. In the 2016 report, recipients of DACA in Mississippi paid an estimated $4.2 million in state and local taxes. The established political base in Mississippi should not look to make the life of immigrants who contribute millions of dollars in taxes to this state uncomfortable, while giving huge breaks to corporations who take advantage of its citizens and its residents. It is important that the minorities of Mississippi understand that the fight for equality did not end in the 1960s, nor is it limited on the hue of our pigmentation. It continues today in 2019.
Attorney Patricia Ice is with the Mississippi Immigrants' Rights Alliance. She says one of the issues they hope to address is driver's licenses or driver's certificates for undocumented immigrants. She says House Bill 403 would enable people to obtain either in Mississippi.
Undocumented people cannot get a driver's license here in Mississippi. So we have a lot of people who are undocumented here who are driving without a driver's license. They are working, but they cannot get a driver's license. They cannot get insurance a lot of times because they don't have a license. You usually have to have a license in order to get insurance. So that is not a safe situation for any of us. So it really behooves the state of Mississippi to allow people to get a driver's license so that they can get insurance, so that they understand the laws here, the laws of the road, and so that they can be held accountable if they are involved in some type of traffic accident or violation. You see people fleeing the scene because they don't have a driver's license sometimes. So that is very important. And ever since I started doing this work in 2001, which is now some 18 years, we have been trying to get a driver's license for undocumented people.
Democratic House member Kathy Sykes of Jackson is sponsoring House Bill 403. She is also pushing another measure, House Bill 422. She says it will address the high cost of college tuition. Sykes says it's not fair that parents of undocumented children have to pay thousands more per semester in out-of-state tuition fees, even though they live here.
It's past time that we require that our students who've lived their life, almost their entire life in Mississippi, have to pay out-of-state tuition. They lived here, they've followed all the rules, they've gone to school, they've done what they should do academically, and when they attempt to go to college, their family has an undue burden of paying out-of-state tuition because they were not born here.
Republican Representative Gary Chisholm of Olive Branch says illegal is illegal, whether the law was broken by an individual crossing the border or carried over as an infant. He told MPB's Desiree Frazier that he does not support legislation that favors undocumented immigrant families in Mississippi.
I don't think we should make it any easier for undocumented aliens to, get driver's license and other things. I think they ought to jump through the same hoops as regular citizens do.
Another issue is the in-state tuition. There's a bill for that as well.
Tuition, no. We should, they should pay out-of-state tuition. They should not be able to get in-state tuition. They should pay out-of-state tuition.
Also this week, the presidents of Mississippi's 8 public universities and the Medical Center met with members of the Senate and House Appropriations Committees to outline their budgets for fiscal year 2020. Overall, the institutions of higher learning is asking for a little over $100 million in additional funding. They say that amount could offset the millions of dollars cut from the system's budget over the years and also address emergency needs on campuses like teacher shortages and deferred maintenance issues.
If we don't receive an increase in funding, either through state appropriations or through tuition increase, and we just basically have a flat budget going in the next year, we are probably facing some cuts in faculty and staff, and we don't want to do that. We have what we need there, and we need to make sure that we're providing the education for our citizens of the Delta and Mississippi, and we need to be able to retain our great talent in our faculty and staff. So investing in the university means investing in good faculty and staff. We have to figure out better efficiencies and economies of scale because we don't have the large mass of students and the larger budgets. We don't have as many out-of-state students that produce a lot of revenue for some of the larger universities. And we don't have research dollars. We're a teaching institution as a regional, so we don't have the big grants and contracts for research that some of our larger sister institutions might have. But our challenge really is to educate Mississippians primarily, and the Delta especially, where we have a lot of first-generation students, a lot of students who come from backgrounds that have really not prepared them well for college, and we have to catch them up.
We want to maintain those high-quality researchers and scientists at Mississippi State, and we want to attract high-caliber scientists and researchers to Mississippi State to, again, keep us on the cutting edge. So when we have budget cuts, it puts great strain on the institution. We're very sensitive to our tuition dollars and what we charge to go to Mississippi State. I'm proud that Mississippi State and all of our state public universities, that our tuition is the lowest in the entire region of the country. We are a tremendous bargain, but nonetheless it's more and more expensive for our young people to go to school. When you don't have, there's only two sources of funding for our institutions, the taxpayers and tuition. And when the taxpayer support goes down, unfortunately the contributions from the students has had to go up.
At Mississippi's three historically black public universities, Alcorn State, Jackson State, and Mississippi Valley State, money from the nation's longest civil rights case has almost reached its end. In 1975, Jake Ayers of Glen Allen sued the state of Mississippi for continuously allocating more money to predominantly white schools. In 2011, after years of dispute, the state and the U.S. Department of Justice reached a $500 million settlement agreement. The three universities have benefited from the settlement through funding for academic programming and infrastructure needs, but JSU President William Bynum says the funds will completely phase out by 2022.
Well, obviously the Ayers settlement was about the disproportionate amount of funding that was given to HBCUs in years past. Of course, a lot of folk who, of course, were involved in the Ayers settlement knew that the amount that the settlement came about wasn't sufficient, or clearly didn't address all the ills in the past. And so, of course, we're facing now, we've already faced what we call the step down. In Jackson State's case, that means we have this year $3.28 million less in our budget because of that step down. And of course, in a couple of years, it'll go away altogether. And so for Jackson State, we're talking about over $6.5 million. We specifically, because most of the HBCUs did the same thing, and that was we dedicated that amount of funding to our STEM, to most of our STEM departments. So in order, of course, to make sure that we're producing high quality engineers and technicians, all kinds of other technology, computer scientists into the workforce. The problem, of course, is as Dr. Lee talked about earlier, we, of course, planned for the step down. However, because of the budget cuts that we received, of course, from the state appropriations, mid-year as well as overall, those plans we had to absorb that now has gone away. And so we're in dire need of making sure that we continue to receive that funding.
Lawmakers have until April to vote on funding for the state's institutions of higher learning. Let's get straight to the point now with views from both sides of the aisle. Brandon Jones is a Democrat. He is an attorney with the Beria Jones law firm and is a former member of the House. Austin Barbour is a Republican national strategist. He is the founding partner of the Clearwater Group. Gentlemen, good to have you both back with us here on At Issue.
Thank you.
Let's start with the teacher pay raise. It's an election year, so perhaps we should expect legislation like this, but this is something that teachers fight for, it seems like, every year. Is this finally going to be the year that it happens?
Oh, yeah, but let's not forget, because I think there's a lot of credit that's due to Tate Reeves, to Philip Gunn, and of course Governor Phil Bryant. In their 8 years, this is the beginning of their 8th year of being in control, both chambers of the legislature and of course the governor's mansion. They have worked very hard on taking the education mantle away from the Democrat Party and saying, we as Republicans are going to fight to improve public education, and here are some of our priorities. And quite frankly, paying teachers more money has been a priority under the leadership of Tate Reeves, Philip Gunn, and of course Governor Phil Bryant. This will be at least the second pay raise that they will pass. I feel very confident this is gonna pass. They did one about 5 years ago. It's a $50 million pay raise done over 2 years. $500 a year. I know that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but listen, it is. It matters to your paycheck every month. I know they wish they could do more, but it's still $50 million. That's a lot of money. There's some other really great things in the bill. Sorry, I'm looking at some notes here to make sure I say this correctly. There is a teacher shortage. They're going to allow retired teachers to come back in to the public school teaching system and get paid just like they were a normal teacher, but not have to forego their pensions that they receive. And that is obviously a very significant thing to help fill the shortage that we have in some school districts around the state.
Let me see if I can grab that mantle back briefly. I think that Republicans have gotten really good about talking about education a lot more than they used to. And I do think that was a smart political move. But this particular pay raise is a slap in the face. They've already tinkered with teacher retirement. They're this year funding MAEP at $240 million under the recommendation. And now they're going to give them a less than $50 pay raise. Teachers are furious about this. And the reason they're furious about it is because in conjunction with all these other ways that they've been shortchanged in the classroom, now they're being told, this is your reward. And so I'm sure that they will fight about that number. But this also gives us a good chance to talk about the interesting way that education dollars work. What will happen is whether it's $50 million, which would be the $500 a year, or it's $2,000, which I know is a thoroughgoing amendment opportunity there, which would be $200 million a year, that money goes into MAEP. And so on paper, it shows as an MAEP expenditure. The problem is that money is being used on something like teacher salaries, which we all agree should be higher. It doesn't go towards closing that gap, that $240 million annual gap that I just mentioned. And before Phil Bryant, Tate Reeves, or Philip Gunn take a victory lap, they need to be reminded that over their 7 years of leadership, we have underfunded MAEP by $1.7 billion, which is the most that program has been underfunded since it came into existence. And so we got some funny math going here. They're probably going to shortchange the teachers. They're going to run that through MAEP, so it looks like they're putting more money in education. But in the final analysis, ask a teacher, ask a student, ask a parent if things are better.
Brandon is really smart. That's a fact. But he's wrong on this, and we can agree to this. I honestly just try to look at the facts here and sort of what is the reality. The reality is that MAEP, which is this complicated formula that nobody can explain of how we're supposed to, fund public schools, is pie in the sky. It's only been fully funded one time in 1 billion years. Brandon's saying 2 in 2 billion years. Nobody can explain it. What's important is that there's been record funding, dollars that go into education, K through 12 program under this leadership. And when you look at the results in the classroom, we've got more third graders that are that can actually read at the grade level as they go into fourth graders. And very quickly, last stat, our kids are graduating at 84%, which is the highest in modern history for Mississippi high school students. So I like those facts.
This probably won't be the last we hear on a teacher pay raise bill, because there are others that will come along. So we'll talk more about that later in the session. Let's move on to the governor's race right now. The latest campaign finance reports indicate that Tate Reeves, Republican, has raised $6.7 million in campaign cash. The leading Democrat, Jim Hood, $1 million, a little over $1 million. Brendan, it appears that Hood has some catching up to do.
Well, I guess you could look at it that way, but Tate Reeves has been sitting on top of a war chest ever since he entered public service. I mean, I think back in his treasurer's race, he raised more money than made any sense at all in a statewide race at that time. So he's always shown an ability to raise money. He's going to need every penny of that, and I still don't think it's going to be enough, because Jim Hood is a more likable figure and he connects more with honest working families in Mississippi. Now, what Tate's going to do with that money is probably try to beat Jim Hood over the face with it by connecting him to national Democrats and some lady out of San Francisco and whoever else they can try to loop him in with. But the simple fact is Jim knows what he's doing. He's done a tremendous job while the legislature has raided the state coffers in the terms of giveaways to out-of-state corporations, he's brought money in to help fund roads, bridges, rural hospitals. So I think he's going to need every dime of that money that he's got. But I'll say this, we forget a Democrat coming into an election year with $1 million in the bank does not happen all that often. So I understand why the media wants to say, oh, it's 6-1, it's 7-1. We haven't had one in a long time. So it's January and we have $1 million in a statewide Democratic race. And I know people think, wow, you're going to need a lot more. Well, yeah, but it's January. So I think he's on track.
One of the things I like about this show is sometimes we can talk about politics and sort of the inner workings of campaigns. And we have a very educated audience. You are very educated. You really are. But big on compliments. That's right. But they understand, what about campaigns. And when we start talking about cash on hand advantages, which is essentially how much money does your campaign have in the bank, to have $7 million in the bank today versus $1 million in the bank is a big advantage to go do the things you want to do. Now listen, what ultimately matters is that Tate Reeves or Jim Hood, obviously I'm a supporter of Tate Reeves, is going to be able to go out there and talk about these are the things that I've done as lieutenant governor, but equally as important, these are the conservative governing philosophies on education and infrastructure and crime and taxes and growing the economy that I want to do as governor. That's the most important thing, but it's very important to be able to have the money to get your message out on TV.
We will hear much more from those two candidates and others and the two of you between now and Election Day in November. We're out of time, though, for now. We thank you for joining us here on At Issue. We invite you to join us again next Friday for another edition of At Issue. You can watch the program online on our website, mpbonline.org/issue. We'll see you next week. Have a good evening.